Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ask the Chairman. This is a board game related Q&A session where you can ask me anything you like. Now, as always, thank you to everybody who submitted questions on the last video, and if you want to keep the series going, then please be sure to leave your questions below this video and I'll answer them on the next episode. Before I get started on the questions, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in my show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. But let's get cracking because we have quite a few questions here to get through. First off, Frog on Boards has asked, do you enjoy playing co-op games? Now, generally speaking, I haven't played too many co-ops, and when I have enjoyed the lighter variety and also more party-driven co-op games. And there's not that many more involved co-ops that I tend to really enjoy. I've had my fun with games like Pandemic, but I'm kind of over it now, and I tend to lean towards more competitive games. He's also asked, which medium weight co-ops would you recommend? Again, there aren't too many I enjoy. Most of them are of the party type, and just a few examples here, the kind of co-op games that I do like. I like games like Letter Jam, a co-op word game, Just One. There's a game called Lock that I've really enjoyed recently, another party one. Maybe the heaviest of the bunch is one called Switch and Signal, which is a kind of a logistics train game that is purely cooperative. That was one that I did enjoy quite a bit. And back to the party variety, Crossed Clues is one that I really like as well. So thank you for the questions there, Frog on Boards. Fuck Your Life has asked, what are some good games to start a games night with friends who don't usually like board games? And he's put a player range of 6 to 10 players. Now, I have written a few examples here, and there are tons of games that actually fit that bracket, but again, you're going to have to lean towards that kind of lighter party style of game. So Skull is a really good kind of bluffing game, really good for non-gamers. Again, Just One for a second mention. Spicy, another nice bluffing card shedding game. If you like social deduction games, the Resistance Avalon is a great one to cater to those higher player counts. Sheriff of Nottingham, see a lot of bluffing games here. For more trivia style games, Wits and Wages is a fantastic one where you can actually bet on other players' answers. So you don't actually need to be too good at general knowledge yourself to still get a lot out of this one. No Thanks is a great card game. Six Nimped, Detective Club. Also, When I Dream, I put Dixit on here, and also Telestrations. So generally a bunch of very accessible party weight games there for you to have a look at if you want some options there. So thank you for your question. John has asked, do I still play Legendary Marvel? No, I don't, John. I actually sold my copy maybe a couple of years ago now. The main reason I sold it was because it was so bloated. I did fall into the trap of buying all of the expansion material, and it became so unwieldy that it just did not get played anymore. He's also asked, do I still feel that the mechanisms in Legendary Marvel still hold up to other deck building games? And I think they absolutely do. Yeah, there's a ton of keywords there, loads of variety, some cool synergizing mechanisms in Legendary, and I think it's a very solid game, and probably still in the top 2 or 3 deck builders that I've played. So I think probably my favorite deck builder at the moment is, in a more traditional sense of a deck builder, something like the Quest for El Dorado, Knizia racing game. It's a bit more simplistic for me and more self-contained, which is what I want from deck builders nowadays. So, I like the idea of deck builders, but I generally find them a bit too much to sort through, and it becomes a bit of an obstacle to get it to the table for me. But as an isolated game, I think Legendary is still very good, and it's obviously got a certain degree of quality because they keep bringing out material for it, and it's probably one of the most expanded games out there. But thank you for your questions, John. Tony has asked, how has my taste in board games evolved over time? So I would say that my tastes have evolved quite significantly. So naturally, when you get into the hobby, you kind of start to explore the heavy hitters, the more popular games. So I started off with Legendary actually, then I went into games like Carcassonne, games like Patchwork, or tons of them out there, even games like Dead of Winter, which I wouldn't play nowadays. And then I recall playing my first Euro game, which was actually Tzolk'in the Mayan Calendar at a friend's house. And that really got me diving into the Euro game space. And I think the more you start really kind of engrossing yourself into the hobby, you lean heavier and heavier and heavier to try and test where your limits are. And for me, at that point, kind of the more, the better. You know, I liked every rule under the sun in a board game. So I was playing games like, you know, Through the Ages. I was playing very heavy style Euros. And then I started realizing that these games are quite difficult to get to the table. So I started to appreciate more kind of refined games from, you know, 20, 25 years ago, maybe 15 to 25 years ago, where it was kind of the forefathers of the Euro genre. There's more kind of beige era games like, you know, Ra, games like the Astari series, games like El Grande, you know, those kind of more pure, simplistic style Euros with still a ton of depth. Those are the games that I really did start to enjoy more and appreciate more, and that's kind of where I'm at now. Now, I also started to appreciate kind of distinct things in games, so games that made certain titles stand out on their own, because of course there are so many games out there. You like to have games with their own identity to find their own place on your shelf. So I kind of just started to appreciate like simple card games with clever mechanisms in, and more, or something that's becoming more apparent to me, and probably one of the strongest metrics to me now, is something that I can get to the table without having to completely relearn the game. So if I can just skim through a rulebook and just pick up on a few of the key points and then memorize the game, that for me is a huge advantage. So even though there's tons of great heavy Euro games out there that I would still recommend, my tastes have changed to games that I can pull off the shelf and get played pretty quickly and without too much pre-work to be put in. So hopefully that kind of explains where I'm at now. Kind of like more pure and simple games, but still with that depth of decisions, rather than having every mechanism under the sun, which is probably where I was at maybe 2 years ago. Tony has also asked, what was a recent new spin on a mechanism that I thought was clever? There are so many, but I've written a few down here on some semi-recent games. The oldest of these games I've written is probably the bidding mechanism from Nidavellir. I thought that was very clever, where you're using these fixed tokens to acquire cards, but the tokens that you didn't use are kind of multiplied with each other and will give you a stronger token to use in the future. So kind of a short time sacrifice for a long-term gain. That was very clever. I like the worker system in Darwin's Journey, where you are building up their certain skills to make them more appropriate for certain spots on the board. That was very cool as well. And even something as simple as the Teletum dice drafting system, where the action or the strength of the action will be on one side of the dice or the die, and the resources you would get from the die would be on one side, and the strength of the action would be on the other. So if you're taking, say, 5 resources, you'd get a strength 2 action. If you're taking 6 resources, you'd get a strength 1 action. Very simple, but very pure, and it just works fantastically. So there's a few examples for you there. He's asked if there are any one-term words or one-word terms that would turn me off a game. I thought of a few here. Terms such as story, campaign, legacy, so all kind of the same things there. I like standalone games. Thematic, I'm not a theme person, I'm a mechanisms man. So normally when terms like thematic are used, I think it's going to be a bunch of flavor text and weak mechanisms. I could be wrong there, but that's how I feel. Miniatures, not interested. And also space, so I generally don't like sci-fi themes. At least it's not my preference. But those are just things that would turn me off. I'm not saying they're deal breakers, but they would certainly turn me off. And in contrast to that, he's asked, are there any one-term words that would turn you on a game? Yes, economic, Euro, of course. I've even put in a few designers' names here, like Knizia, Feld. So yeah, you could probably, if you know the kind of games I like, you'd know what things I'm looking for. But there's a few examples and some great questions there, so thank you very much, Tony. Diamond Meeple has asked, do I find abstracts dry due to the little to no randomness? I don't know if dry is the right word, but I kind of have a certain perception of a certain type of abstract game when there's absolutely zero luck. I find that I stress a lot over not making mistakes. You know, I find me thinking about not making mistakes a lot less fun than me just going on my gut and just trying to have fun and enjoy the process. And I also feel like those kind of abstract games, I don't really feel good winning because it makes the opponent feel so bad losing, and vice versa, because you feel like a bit of a sucker if you lose at them. So I wouldn't say dry is the right word, but I don't normally extract a whole lot of fun from those perfect information style games. Now, there are exceptions to that, but that's maybe my mind is changing on that, but that's how I've always felt about those pure abstract strategy games over the years. And to follow on from that, he's asked, am I transcending into games requiring more skill and agency? I certainly don't think so. You know, as I was saying, those really heavy games I was playing a few years ago, there's pretty much little luck in those. It's definitely loads of agency, loads of skill, and I've kind of filtered away from that a little bit. But my general appreciation for more abstract style games has increased. You know, recently I've covered games such as Chin, Arcadia, Samurai, War Chest. These are all pretty low luck games that I think are amazing, and I've enjoyed them, you know, hugely. So in that respect, my appreciation of abstract games has gone up. But in the same vein, I've enjoyed a ton of games that are very luck dependent. You know, games such as The Number, Rapido, even Spicy. You know, these bluffing games. I love all games like that. So I'm definitely on both sides of the spectrum. I like skill games. I like luck games. So I don't think I lean either, you know, one particular way. But thank you very much for the questions. Matt has asked, what game have I found the most difficult to teach? So I've tried to steer away from those heavy Euro games because naturally they're going to be very difficult to teach because of the sheer amount of rules. But these are a couple of games that, despite being simple, I found communicating the rules pretty difficult because they're not the most intuitive. I think that's probably the right word. And the key example of this I always give is Tigris and Euphrates. So a Knizia classic, basically an abstract game, but it's a tile placement game as you're trying to compete over majorities basically and start generating ticking points to get points. The game is so difficult to explain because there's two different styles of combat which almost work the same but work differently. The combat is strange the way it resolves, and it's just quite a hard game to process and internalize. And I think after you learn it, you need to kind of play it again and again for it to really sink in. And I'd always kind of leave it a long gap between I played it before the last time. You know, well, the gaps between each play would be bigger and bigger, and it almost seemed like we're learning the game again. And it's just a very hard game to communicate, I think. And I always get tons of questions asked, people scratching their heads about how this works, even though there's not that many rules. So that's a very difficult game to teach, in my opinion. And I think I'm good at teaching the game as well. So you know, that goes to show it's not the easiest game to grok. And another game which is actually a party game, which is probably the thing that throws people off, maybe off center with this one, is Decrypto. So Decrypto is a fantastic kind of team versus team party game that really blew up at the time where Codenames was huge. I think this game is much better than Codenames, but it is so difficult to teach the way the game works without actually playing it, because it's a game that you just kind of fall into mistakes or making, and it's just tricky to understand because it doesn't flow so naturally. But gameplay itself is so simple, but you do need to play it rather than explaining it. And if you played Decrypto, you will understand what I mean. So that is a couple of examples there. And another bunch of games that I always find are difficult to teach are social deduction games, because people are so scared of making mistakes, remembering all the different roles and how they interact with each other. They're more games that you need to learn by playing, I think, and just front-loading the rules is always so jarring. So that's hopefully that answers your question, Matt. Thank you. T-Ball has asked, what game would I bet on myself to win? So great question, and I've kind of used data that my winning percentages are really high on. I don't think I'm particularly great at these games, but I suppose I'm in a position where I don't make too many mistakes. So maybe that's that gives me a good footing. And some games here are Mandala. I think I've played Mandala quite a few times. I've only lost once, I think. And again, it's not a massively skillful game. I just tend to not make too many glaring errors. El Grande is my favourite game of all time. I've had tons of close games of it, and generally I do quite well. So I like my odds on that one. Again, I don't always win, but I'm pretty good at it. Ra is in the same vein. I played Ra quite a lot. Got tons of luck in the game, but I tend to know how to hedge my bets and know when to make the right decisions. Cryptid, which is kind of a pure deduction game. I'm not generally that good at deduction games, but my winning percentage on Cryptid I think is perfect. I don't think I've ever lost Cryptid, weirdly. Hanamakoji is a game I got very good at after a while. My skills have definitely decreased and diminished since then, but I could probably get them back up. Patchwork and Wits and Wages. My general knowledge is generally pretty good, and my winning rate with Wits and Wages is pretty good as well. So there are a few examples there, but thank you for the question, T-Ball. That's a really interesting one. Brett has asked, are board games getting too expensive? This is a mixed bag. I think at face value, maybe they are, because you go buy a deck of cards now, it's going to cost you 20 quid, but you got to understand that that's not just the raw materials, it's also the development work, the artwork, all this stuff. So I can understand how it does start to mount up. And it's maybe a bit of a stereotype, or a bit of a thing that people lean on, is that comparing it to different medium, it's probably not too expensive, because you can play the same board game 10 times. If it costs you £40, that's £4 to play. That's like £4 for a couple of hours entertainment. So in that respect, it's pretty cheap. But as you start obviously building a huge collection, maybe the value isn't so good. But it depends. Sometimes you can get a relatively cheap game. Like, for example, I've got Acropolis there. It cost about £20. I played it to death, and I still love it, and will play it loads more. In the same vein, I've bought games that are £100, and I played them twice before selling them. So again, there's a big scope in difference there, I think. Sometimes you get great value just through the amount of enjoyment you get from it. Sometimes not great value if you're going to play a game a couple of times. It just depends. And although it's expensive, I think the good thing about this hobby is that a lot of the games hold their value. So even though that has a high upfront cost, you can normally recuperate a big percentage of your money back and invest in new games in the future. So I think once you've got that ball rolling, it's quite manageable. But yeah, of course, things are going up. They're getting more and more expensive. And sadly, that's just a sign of the times we're in. Mr. J. Marzetti has asked, what game would I like to see reprinted? So I've done this through an unselfish means. So these are games that I think I'd love to see out there, just so other people could play them. Games like Vikings, I think needs to be reprinted. It is one of the best kind of medium, lightweight, tile placement family games out there. A spectacular game. There's nothing wrong with it. Just hit the print button and get it out there again. And also Chin, which is what I mentioned earlier. Simple abstract game, very difficult to get hold of, and it's just absolutely brilliant and evergreen for sure. And I suppose a lot of the games that I wanted to see reprinted have been reprinted. Games like Bruges was reprinted recently. Shipyard's being reprinted. Kalamala's being reprinted. So there's definitely going to be a lot more. I think there's going to be fewer games out there that need that reprint button, because people are struggling for ideas and they're going back to the old ones and getting them back out there. Even El Grande is being reprinted. So everything is coming back. He's also asked, what is my Grail game? So if you don't know what that means, it basically means a game that I'm kind of hunting high and low for to find a copy, because they're very rare and hard to get hold of. I would say my Grail game is a game called Witness, which is an older game actually. One that it's kind of like a deduction murder mystery game, as you're whispering in each other's ears and everybody gets a different piece of the information. I've wanted to play that one for such a long time, since I've gotten into the hobby, but I just cannot find a copy anywhere. So hopefully one day I will get a copy of it. Most games that I've previously had on my Grail games list, I've managed to get a hold of. I remember Bora Bora was a Grail game for me for a long time. and I managed to get a copy. If St. Petersburg was a Grail game for me, I managed to get a copy. So, fingers crossed I'll get a copy of this one as well. So let's move on to the final sheet of questions here then. I think this is still the same. Yeah, this is still Mr. Marzetti. He's asked, who are my favourite board game content creators? Generally speaking, I don't consume too much board game related content because I prefer to create rather than consume. And I trust my own opinion more than anybody else's. But there are a few that I do enjoy. At number one, Luke Hector from The Broken Meeple. I think he's a unique voice out there. We have very different tastes in games, but I appreciate his authenticity, which I think is the most important currency we have, especially on YouTube and stuff like that. You cannot make up for that, and whatever you think of his content, you cannot deny that he is telling the truth. At least in his own opinion, he's not sugarcoating anything, and I like that about him. So yeah, I watch his stuff even though I don't necessarily like the same games as he does, because I think he has. I think he's a credible source. And Mackenzie Franklin from Side Game LLC, we are friends. He comes on my channel. We do content together. I think he's very articulate, very knowledgeable, and he can explain games so well. I mean, I think it's his speciality. He's a teacher, so he's good at that kind of stuff. Again, very positive, but still he can critique things very articulately, and he means what he says and says what he means, despite having a positive polish on things. So I think he's massively underrated, and he should be one of the biggest YouTubers. And some other ones that I really like are Takaijo, so Tia, I think she's called. She and I have very similar tastes in games, actually, and she's not scared to tell the truth. She doesn't like a game, she'll tell you, but still she's very charming. Get great takes on games, and yeah, I think she's fantastic at what she does. Sadly, a podcast that I did used to like that don't make content anymore, at least not as they did, was a podcast called Back of the Shelf. Now, these are friends, they have great chemistry, really good, fun podcasts. And to be honest, the board gaming was kind of a side part from their chemistry. They were so interesting and fun to listen to. And they just talked about old board games that they've played tons of times, and they wouldn't really care about all the new hotness and stuff. They'd just talk about the games that they loved. And I really thought they had a great thing going, but I think they've stopped what they were doing, which is a bit of a shame. And I suppose one of the long-term podcasts that I've dipped in and out of was Board Game Barrage, which I think are one of the biggest ones at the moment. I know they're one of the most successful podcasts out there. I think they're great. They're really good at what they do. And again, despite their popularity, they've never really given me any signs to doubt their credibility either. If they get given review copies, they won't give a damn saying that this game is rubbish. And I like that about them. And again, they've got great chemistry, which is a huge thing. Very authentic people. So yeah, there's a few examples there. But that's pretty much my scope of what I listen to or what I consume, because I'm making my own stuff and I make my own opinions. He's also asked, what is my player colour? What player colour do I choose? If I can, I'll always choose yellow. If yellow isn't an option, I'll choose the next brightest colour. So normally orange or white. And that's because I am severely colourblind and I like to choose the brightest colour on the board so I know who's me. That's pretty much the logic behind that. But thank you for your questions. And finally, Keith has asked, how much time do I spend searching for games to add to my collection, and how do I do it? I don't actively spend time searching through content and trying to pick out games that I might be interested in. It just kind of passively happens. Maybe if I'm browsing Board Game Geek, something in the hotness will pop up that will catch my attention, or maybe a geek list about what's coming out at Essen or Gen Con. That might get my attention as well. Going through designers' back catalogues of games, if I know I've found a new designer that I like, I'll go try his old games out and see if they're as good as the other stuff he's putting out. And of course, recommendations from you guys as well. Loads of my games in my collection have come from direct recommendations from my viewers because they know the kind of games that I enjoy, and more often than not, they land for me. So that's generally how I find the games that I add to my collection. He's asked what commonly gets my interest when it comes to board games. I assume he means what kind of elements, what common things do I look for, I suppose. I've put here something unique. You know, as I said, there's so much repetition in the board game genre at the moment. So even if you do something unique, I will at least check it out. I might not like it, but I'll at least appreciate you are trying something different. And I like certain visuals, you know, I tend to like my beige style games. I like medieval style games. I like that kind of Age of Discovery style games. Those just, I don't know, they just feel comfortable to me. I like those that visuals. And the games that are normally wrapped up in that skin are what I look for. So those are just a few things there. And the final question, or questions, are what games have I took a chance on and either liked or disliked? So I'll start off with the liked. So, and one here is brand new, actually a recent one I've added to my collection, which is War Chest. I wasn't sure how this was going to land for me because, again, it is very abstract. And I did have those concerns, which I mentioned earlier, about being too jarring, a bit too transparent. But absolutely hit a perfect chord for me. I think this game is amazing, and I'm kind of annoyed that I didn't try it earlier. Games like Barrage, which is actually a top 5 game for me. I was somewhat concerned about that one, despite loving the designer, loving the idea of it. I thought it was going to be a bit too mean, a bit too cutthroat for me. Not the case at all. I think the game is amazing. And a strange one now, that it sounds weird saying it because I like it so much and I've liked it for so long. I took a chance on Seven Wonders Duel. So I actually wasn't a huge fan of the original Seven Wonders, but I heard so many good things about Seven Wonders Duel, picked it up, and I think it is an absolute classic. You know, why didn't I try this one earlier? It is amazing. So those are a few examples there of games that I took a chance on, but I liked. Sounds silly now because they are all amazing and some of my favourite games. But some of the ones I disliked, Dark Ages was a huge kind of a Civ game with miniatures by Board and Dice. Maybe in retrospect, I should have known that I wouldn't like it, but it just had a bit too much going on. It was too slow, but I wanted to like it, and I was looking forward to it so much because I love that Dark Age setting, and I like that idea of kind of a dudes on the map game with some infrastructure building, some Civ stuff going on, technology trees. It sounded great to me, but it didn't land. It was just too slow. Court of the Dead was one as well. Kind of an area control game with some communal things going on, some card drafting, amazing visuals. I kind of like the IP, but the game itself fell very flat for me. Pagan, Fate of Roanoke was one that didn't land, but it could have. We took a chance on it and it didn't quite work out. And another one was Imperium. So if you remember a couple of years ago, this card game came out. I think it was David Turtsey and Nigel Buckle. I did not like the game at all. It's kind of an asymmetric faction versus faction card game, but I thought it was going to be a bit more Euro. It's kind of a deck building light game. It's just very convoluted, very confusing, I thought. And I bounced off that one hard, to the point where I didn't even review it because I felt so negatively about it. But there are a few examples there for you. Thank you for your questions, Keith. So that concludes the video. That's all the questions answered, I believe. I hopefully I've not missed out on any. To repeat myself, please be sure to submit your new questions below this video, and I'll guarantee to answer them on the next one. Again, no questions means no more videos in the series, so please get them in. If you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other content too. And for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.